Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Banking on Success, How Cannabis Businesses Can Strengthen Their Financial Health. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Noelle Skadinsky with Cannabis Business Times. If you're in the cannabis industry, whether you're a plant-touching business or an ancillary business, banking, insurance, cash flow, pretty much anything financial carries unique and often burdensome and costly challenges. So I'm particularly excited about this webinar today, where experts from GreenCheck are going to share practical strategies to help you optimize your business's financial health. I'd first like to thank GreenCheck for making this important webinar possible. GreenCheck is the leading provider of cannabis banking solutions and expert advisory services for financial institutions. Its mission is to support the legal cannabis industry by connecting every cannabis business with the financial and business services that they need to grow. Don't we all need those? You can find out more at greencheckverified.com. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping notes, just a couple technical things to go over with you. First, we will be leaving time at the end of the webinar for the speakers to answer as many questions as they can. So you can enter your questions at any time during the webinar. If you would enter them in the Q&A box, you should at the bottom of your screen see a little box with a question mark. It says Q&A under it. If you could put your questions in there so that the speakers can see all of the questions in one place at the end, that would be great, instead of using just the webinar chat box. Second, we will be recording the webinar, so if you have to leave at any time or want to rewatch it later, we'll be sending out a link where you can watch the recorded webinar probably within a few days, definitely within a week. And then before I begin and introduce our speakers, we are going to launch a brief poll. If you want to give me just a second. Tony, I don't know if you're there. Can you launch the poll? Oh, thank you. Sorry, it disappeared from the bottom of my screen. So we're going to, if you're going to see a brief poll on your screen, if you would take a second just to answer that while I introduce our speakers for today. So we're pleased to have Mike Kennedy here with us. He's a co-founder and chief strategy officer at GreenCheck. Mike's background is in helping community financial institutions leverage technology to better manage their compliance and risk functions, which are plenty in cannabis, and he has helped hundreds of institutions develop and implement bespoke compliance programs. Prior to founding GreenCheck Verified, Mike helped scale Continuity, the first software as a service-based compliance management system for community financial institutions. We're also pleased to have here Stacy Litke. She is the vice president of banking programs at GreenCheck with decades of experience in the financial services industry. Time spent in retail, lending, operations, and technology, and from the seats of a community banker, fintech exec, and consultant, has provided Stacy with a comprehensive view of the industry. Prior to joining GreenCheck, Stacy was senior vice president of operations for a Massachusetts-based $900 million institution. Today, she uses her collective experience to help financial institutions with compliant cannabis banking programs. So with that, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And I am pleased to turn things over to Stacy. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. Thanks for the great introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here today talking through financial services with you and hopefully sharing some insights on how you can leverage your financial relationships for the benefit of your business. We're going to cover a few things today. We're going to talk about the foundational banking relationship. I'm glad to see here in the poll that only 33% of you are struggling with banking access, that most of you do have that. We're going to talk about a little bit how to get that banking access. We're going to talk through cash flow considerations and things you need to think around cash handling, as well as some additional options for getting some capital to help with that scaling that most of you are looking for help with. And then we're going to cover a few additional services along the way. So starting out with the banking relationship. Um, Financial services are not as difficult to get as they used to be. I mean, if you go back 4 or 5 years, there were, maybe 100, maybe 200 banks that were servicing the industry across the country. And in most cases, you had to work with limited services. Nowadays, we find that, about 10% of the financial institutions out there are working with the industry, and many of them have programs that are nationwide. So if you are someone who is struggling with having a relationship with a cannabis-friendly institution, please let us know. We can help you find some. We have a number of folks in our Green Check ecosystem, but that banking relationship is foundational to everything else that you're doing. And if you're one of those businesses that's trying to manage your financial services through a personal account and a whole lot of cash, paying employees in cash, buying things in cash, only moving, certain things through your personal account, that's kind of a recipe for disaster. You really should be with a cannabis-friendly institution that allows you to manage your payroll directly through that account, to deposit cash directly to that account, so that everything is being managed through a business account, just like any other business that you have been around. So once you start working towards that banking relationship, there are a number of key data points that you can be expected to provide to your financial institution. They've got a whole big list of compliance things that they need to do as well. So they're going to be asking you for some key pieces of information through the application, and as long as you have the relationship. Uh, some of those things are your sales data from your point of sale or invoicing system, the status of your license, knowing that you have an active license in your state. That information is monitored all the time to make sure that you still have that license. They're going to ask a lot of questions around your beneficial ownership structure, and they need to go down to anyone who owns 10% or more of your company to understand how the company comes together. And that can be really complex. Sometimes you have companies that are part owners, and then they need to understand the owners of that company. So they're gonna ask some questions there as well. And then there may be additional documentation that's requested through the application process or the relationship process, um, to dig into a specific situation. Great example would be if you hire a managed service company and you have a managed service agreement with them. They might ask for that documentation to understand who is doing what in the relationship. And before I talk about what happens if that data isn't provided, I'd love to turn it over to Mike a little bit to talk about efficient ways in which you can provide sales data.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stacy. So this list, as Stacy alludes to, is not exhaustive. As anyone on the call who's opened a cannabis bank account can attest, every financial institution will have a laundry list of things they need to ask of you and from you. An important thing to keep in mind in terms of how to optimize financial success is never believe that a request is going to be singular. Assume it will be a repeat request, meaning if your financial institution is requiring sales or revenue data to be reported, assume they're going to request that on an ongoing basis. The same is true for your license status, your ownership details, virtually anything that a financial institution asks for at the onset of the relationship, you can expect them to ask for on an ongoing basis as well. And sometimes it's simply attesting that the information is still current and up to date. Other times it's resubmitting a certificate of good standing or recertifying your beneficial ownership details. So to the extent that it's possible, try to prepare yourself by making this sort of information easily repeatable and reportable. Try to document where to obtain such information throughout your business so that if a partner or a manager or another stakeholder needs to provide that in your absence, they know where to go to find it and not risk holding up any of your financial operations. Certainly, when it comes to the sales or the revenue tracking data, understand that this is not because the financial institution is trying to, pry under the covers. It's because they're under strict regulatory obligation to reconcile the deposits entering the financial institution against compliant sales or revenue coming from a licensed cannabis activity. So the most efficient way to do that is to integrate your sales or seed to sale tracking system directly with the bank. Some banks have built integrations to Metric and other point of sale systems. Others use software solutions such as GreenCheck to fully automate that process so that you don't have to spend time preparing daily, weekly, or monthly reports. That data can seamlessly flow through and automatically get reconciled for the institution. If you're unable to provide the sales and revenue data on an ongoing basis, make sure you ask if they're looking for line item level reports, summaries by payment type or by product type, or simply a single digit at the end of the period. Knowing the expectations ahead of time will help you build the reporting infrastructure necessary to make this part of the ongoing process seamless and hopefully not obtrusive as you continue to run your business.
Great points, Mike. All right, so when I indicated that I would talk about account closures, this is something that cannabis businesses are at risk for. And there are a number of reasons which would prompt a financial institution to close your account. And that might be the inability or unwillingness to provide the data points and documentation that Mike and I just covered. The most important thing with a financial institution relationship is transparency. And the more you work together with your financial institution and the more you provide the information, you are demonstrating that you are compliance minded as well and that you're taking your role to follow the state rules around cannabis seriously. So non-compliance would be one of the first reasons for closing an account. Now, that one luckily is within your control. You can absolutely provide the sales documentation, keep your documentation handy and updated, and that will help you to avoid having your account closed for non-compliance. Where it gets a little less controllable by you as the cannabis business is when the strategy or perspective from the financial institution changes, and this does happen from time to time. Sometimes there is a change in policy or strategy. For example, they may have gotten into supporting the cannabis industry because they wanted to add more business relationships and build up their deposits. And then as they change strategy, they may decide they no longer want to do as many business accounts. They may no longer want to take the risk involved. They could have a new CEO that wants to take the financial institution in a completely different direction, and there's only so many resources, so they may jettison one program to start something else. The other thing that is out of your control as a business is if the institution goes through a merger or acquisition. We've seen this a couple of times where the acquiring financial institution doesn't want the cannabis program. So as the two institutions merge, unfortunately, the cannabis businesses need to find a new home. So sometimes, even if you provide all the documentation, all the sales information, and you do everything that the bank asks, they still may ask you to close their account if they're exiting their cannabis program. So then, now what do you do? There's a couple of things that you can do to prepare for this. One of the things is to have a secondary account. Now, this is advice I'm giving personally because I've seen so many cannabis businesses get sort of stuck where, beyond their control, an account gets closed and they have to rush to get an account open. So it is nice to have that secondary account. That way you can just sort of move all of the automated items and payroll and everything over to the secondary account and you're up and running fairly quickly. I will give you the caveat though, that some financial institutions require you to have all your business with them, and that if you have a secondary account, they may require you to provide statements on that account. But it is something you can do to sort of mitigate the risk of having to quickly react to an account closure notice. Usually they give you plenty of notice when this happens, 30 or 60 days, to let you know that your account will be shut down and what steps they can do to help you. But there's also a lot that we can do here at GreenCheck to help you. And Mike, you want to cover that?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, just to level set, it's not uncommon to ask a financial institution if they have an exit strategy in place. Meaning, at the onset of a relationship, you're fully entitled to inquire with that institution, how long have they been banking cannabis? What is their formal policy around if they should decide to exit the industry? How much notice will be given? What will be their level of effort in helping you to, find another institution? But also know, and this maybe is less common knowledge, the financial service industry is largely referral based. It's sort of like when you go to the doctor, right? If you need to see a specialist, you ask your primary care physician, they give you a referral. A lot of bankers operate with that same mindset. So if you find yourself in the unfortunate scenario where your primary bank has decided to wind down their program, it's very likely that they are aware of other local or national institutions that are willing to take your business. Of course, at GreenCheck, we have this sort of built in as an ethos. We exist for the sole purpose of providing access to financial services. And so our network allows you to easily transfer your account from one institution to another. So whether it's opening a secondary account, as Stacy mentioned, or migrating your primary account from one institution to the next, we make it easy to seamlessly share those same details that you've already provided, such as your license, ownership details, sales and revenue data, et cetera. So unfortunately, it does happen, but us and others in the industry are trying to take steps to make it as seamless a process as possible.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about cash. We know that this is a cash intensive industry. No matter what happens, there's going to be a lot of cash in this industry. There, the challenges that exist today are primarily because of the lack of payments. However, it's also an industry that not everybody wants the transactions on their statements, so they will use cash as a preference. The trouble that we get into as an industry with using cash primarily is it could get really expensive really quickly. I was talking with one of the accountants that's part of our sort of our GreenCheck family, and she was telling me that a lot of her clients have far more expenses when they do things in cash because they don't have clear records when they pay things in cash. They may lose a receipt, they may duplicate payments, and it takes a lot of effort and time to track all of that cash in a bookkeeping environment. So right from the accountants, they suggest you get a bank account as soon as you can and try not to work in cash. I also heard some feedback from one of our lending contacts, and they said, part of the challenge is a lot of operators will hold back cash because it's expensive to put it in the bank. You have to pay the courier, you have to pay the cash processing fees, and so what we see is that they'll put into the bank account only as much as they need to pay their bills, and they keep the rest of the cash on site so they don't have to pay those fees. However, this lender shared with me that if they are not able to show the regular cash flow when you go to apply for a loan, and they're going to look at your bank statements, and if they can't see a regular, consistent cash flow coming in, then they're going to ask you, like, okay, so where's your revenue? And if you tell them, well, I've got $11 million in the vaults, they're going to audit that. They're going to have to send someone in to count that cash and make sure that if you say you have 11 million, you really do. So that process is going to be far more expensive, and it's going to hold up your loan application while that piece is being done. So, to use a phrase my grandmother used to use, you're being a little bit penny wise and pound foolish, where you're saving money on the weekly cash courier, but it's costing you headaches and heartache down the road, and additional expense. So think about that as you're dealing with cash. The other thing that is expensive for those of you that are working primarily in cash is pilferage, right? Money goes missing. And there are some tools out there that can help you with that cash recyclers and cash smart safes and cash drawers, things that can dispense equipment that can dispense the cash as needed and keep it secure so that your pilfering risk is much lower with dealing with cash. The other thing that I see quite frequently is I was actually talking to an operator yesterday who said, "Oh, I remember the days where we had 3 people go out with identical backpacks. Two of us were decoys, one was the regular, so that somebody you'd make an attempt to be safe." You have to think about the safety of your employees if you're trying to transport cash in duffel bags and backpacks. It's really not a safe practice. Having a courier come and pick up your cash, they have an armored truck, they have been trained in security procedures, they're going to make sure that that cash gets to where it needs to be safely without putting your employees at risk. So while we understand that cash is definitely an issue for this industry and will continue to be for quite a while, there are ways to safely manage it and manage it efficiently so that it doesn't end up costing you more down the road. Anything you wanted to add on that one, Mike?
No, just yeah, matching backpacks, never a good idea.
Nope. All right, so what do we do about payments? There's not a really clear and good answer here. The main issue with payments is that MasterCard, Visa, Discover, Amex, they all have operating rules that say no cannabis transactions. So what's happened over time is that there's been a number of payment companies that have tried to solve this problem through a variety of ways. Some of them have been sketchy, to say the least, and not reliable. And some of them are legitimate operations where they're trying to do the right thing and use alternative rails other than MasterCard and Visa. So when you are looking at payment options, make sure that you understand how long the company has been in business. One of the common things that has happened with payments over time is they go as long as they can until they get shut down, and then they reopen in a new company name, do the same thing over and over again, and make as much money as they can in the 3 to 6 months before they get caught. So whenever I talk to a payment company, the first thing I ask them is, how long have you been in business? And when they say, less than 6 months, I'm not interested in continuing the conversation because there has to be some longevity there to show that their methods are not being shut down. So we work with a company called Bank Card International. They're part of the Green Check ecosystem, and they have been kicking around for quite a while, and they have a couple of different solutions. So they're certainly someone worth talking with. The second most popular option is cashless ATMs. And this one can be a little bit controversial because the transaction hits the financial institution as an ATM withdrawal. So basically what's happening is the customer is doing an ATM withdrawal at your cash register, and you're sort of giving them the $50, and then you're taking it back for the $48 in product, and then you're giving them the change. Like that's kind of what happens, although we know you just net out the transaction. And there's one camp which I tend to be in, which is, what's the difference whether I took $50 out of the ATM or $50 out of your cash register? It's still a cash withdrawal. But there's also another camp that feels like the transaction is being obfuscated and not clear that it was a cannabis purchase. So because of that, and because of the operating rules with Visa and MasterCard, occasionally those will get shut down as well. I think it was a year and a half or so ago, Visa put out a warning like, we know what you're up to, we know what you're doing, and we might shut you down. So again, make sure you're dealing with a reputable company that has been in the space a long time and knows how to process these transactions the correct way in a compliant manner. AeroPay, also known as AeroGreen, is one of the service providers that we work with, and they've been around for a while, and they do a great job. So making sure that you are looking at contracts and the length of time a business has been in place, and don't just go for the cheapest solution because it may not be the most reliable one.
And just to clarify the AeroPay, so they actually offer a pay by bank or an ACH option rather than a cashless ATM. So I think we missed that on the, might have dropped a row here. But do you want to speak about
Oh,
the
yes.
ACH option, Stace?
Yes, yes, yes. Thanks, Mike, for catching that. The pay by bank or ACH option is this is typically when you see someone use their phone and they scan a QR code. And what happens there is they link the mobile app directly to their customer's bank account. So routing number, account number, and that transaction gets processed through ACH. Now, ACH has not been a problem in the industry. The payments don't get shut down. They go right through. There's no problem. The association that runs ACH payments has been very neutral on cannabis. However, what we see the challenge there is that consumers have some trouble adopting the technology because they may go to 2 or 3 different dispensaries and each one has a different app or a different pay by bank option. So they end up having to have multiple apps and it's just easier to take cash out. So adoption can be an issue on those, but it can be a really safe, reliable solution for payments as well. The other pretty reliable option is to have an ATM on site. And this is where you know, park one of those little ATMs over in your lobby, and that way folks can get cash from you on site. And in some cases, you have the opportunity to earn revenue on those transactions so that you're not just getting easy cash payments in your office, you also have the ability to share in the revenue. Now, we work with PAI, powered by Brinks, and not only will they help you get the ATM in your lobby that will help you earn some revenue, they'll also work with you on branding, and they'll wrap the thing exactly, you know, in line with your brand, so it fits right into your lobby and it isn't just an ugly gray little ATM over there. So that's an option as well. And of course, cash is always an option, but we know that there are you know, expenses in handling that. But there's also benefits to, it's a familiar format for the customer and they can easily pay for their transactions that way.
I'll add that, you know, from RC, ACH is it tends to be the most reliable form of cashless payment. And, you know, this is true in the retail and the wholesale environment. So ACH is typically cheaper than wire and certainly less cumbersome than cash if you're, you know, conducting a wholesale transaction. And on the consumer side, Stacy raised a good point that the point of sale itself, the consumer on ramp, is typically the most difficult problem to overcome, right? We've all seen the Starbucks app or, you know, other big box stores that have their own payment portal where it's ubiquitous because everybody shops at the same stores. And we don't quite have that level of traction in the cannabis industry just yet. If there are any dispensary operators in the call looking for the best ACH payment provider to offer to reduce that friction, it sounds anti-competitive, but do a survey of the surrounding dispensaries in your area and figure out what other folks are using. If 3 out of the 5 dispensaries in your market already have, say, AeroPay, for example, then you adding AeroPay should help to prevent the likelihood of businesses not, or I'm sorry, of customers not already having an account and thus reducing the friction at checkout.
That's a really good point. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit from payments over to lending because that is definitely a hot topic. I did see in the poll that the majority of you are looking for options for capital and scaling. The good news is that traditional lenders are starting to come into this space. Up until probably a year or so ago, you were looking at working with an alternative lender. And because they were an alternative lender and they were the only game in town, they were able to charge higher rates. And I've seen anything from, you know, 15 to 30% on average for a loan through an alternative lender. Now that the traditional lenders are coming into the space, I believe that's going to start driving the cost of lending down because the traditional lenders are going to come into this market somewhere in the 9 to 12, maybe 15% rate. So that's going to be competitive to the alternative lenders, and that will make the cost of funding for the industry much better. The great news is that if you've had high priced debt over the last several years and that debt is coming due, you might have the opportunity to refinance that debt with a traditional lender and bring down that expense. So don't hesitate to talk to your primary financial institution. Again, going back to that banking relationship being foundational, if you have a bank that you're working with on the deposit side or a credit union and you need capital, start there. Talk to them first. Because if anyone knows you and knows your business, it will be them, and they'll be much more familiar with your sales revenue, your expenses, all of those things. Um, Besides traditional and alternative lenders, there still are some options for equity financing, although from what I understand, the folks willing to put equity in, or excuse me, put money in exchange for equity are less now than they were, say, 5 or 10 years ago. So you certainly want to protect yourself for any equity investments to make sure that everything is documented. Sometimes you get a friend or family that's like, yeah, I'll put in $100,000 and you can pay me back later on. Don't let it just be a verbal. Make sure that it's documented and that everyone understands the terms of ownership, the terms of repayment. Protect yourself in that situation so that you don't put yourself in a precarious situation. But there are some options for capital. We have a few folks in our ecosystem. And as Mike said, with the green check application, all of your profile information is already in our application, so that if you want to apply for a loan, you can just kind of share the documentation that you've already given to your financial institution with another lender if your financial institution isn't able to help you. There are a number of different types of loan. Commercial real estate tends to be the most popular, where they're going to be taking a lien on your facility. But there's also some comfort level in things like equipment financing. If you're going to buy a pre-roll joint machine and it's going to cost you $700,000, you can get some financing for that. There are some alternative lenders that will do things like invoice factoring or even startup costs. So if you have needs for capital and you want some help finding the right lender, let us know and we can connect you. When it comes to obtaining capital, this is true for traditional lenders and most alternative lenders. There's a number of things that the lenders are going to be looking at. So it seems helpful to tell you about them so you can prepare for these conversations. They're each going to have their own specific requirements, but there are some things that are consistent. And I'm going to run through those a little bit here. One is what they call a debt service coverage ratio. And that's basically a way of saying, do you make enough money to pay your bills? So if you had $500,000 in operating income and $500,000 in debt, that is a debt service coverage ratio of 1. They want to see that you're above 1, that you have more money than you have debt. The other thing they're going to look at is collateralization. So in the case of a commercial real estate loan, that is the real estate. In the case of an equipment loan, that is the filing on the equipment. So if you don't pay the loan, if all their math checks out and you still can't pay the loan, they've got a plan B to be able to go and repossess either the real estate or the equipment. We also see a lot of personal guarantees. So they might ask an owner for a personal guarantee, which means if the business does not succeed in paying the loan, they can go to the owner and pull on their personal assets for loan repayment. So there are multiple ways to collateralize a loan. And there are some institutions that are considering unsecured loans, like a small unsecured line of credit. So in that case, you may not need collateral, but in a lot of cases, they're going to be looking to you to say, okay, what can you do to secure this loan? They're going to be looking at your viability a little bit differently than other businesses. If you think about when I'm looking at a plumbing business to determine whether or not they're going to be in business, it's a pretty sure bet that, people are always going to need plumbing, and as long as the plumber does the things the right way, he's going to be in business. With cannabis industry business, there's some additional factors that need to be thought about in terms of the viability of the business. And some of them, again, are outside of your control. The market that you're in is a big factor. If you're in a market that's oversaturated and in a point where it's consolidating and there's more supply than demand, that would be a negative impact to your ability to get a loan because they're looking at the market in general and whether or not the market will continue to support as many businesses as there are. They're also going to be looking at compliance-minded behaviors, because if you lose that license for lack of compliance, your business is no longer viable. So the things, that are sort of common are you able to repay the loan? Do you have the collateral? But then they're also looking more broadly to the compliance in the market and the industry specifics. Credit is always something that a financial institution will look at. They'll look potentially at your own credit. There are some companies out there like C-Trust that are starting to build cannabis business credit scores that could be used. And the point there is they're trying to see what your propensity is to repay debt, and the credit score is typically an indicator of that. The other thing that's unique about the cannabis industry that can impact your ability to get financing is your tax liabilities. And this is something we see a lot in the industry where operators are unable or are several years behind on paying their tremendous tax liabilities. And that is something that the financial institution is going to look at, because if you owe the federal government a large amount of money, that could get in the way of the institution being paid. Because if the IRS shows up and they want their money, you're in a situation where they could just take it out of your account and now you can't make your loan payments. So they will look at that. That'll be part of their assessment of whether or not you are a good risk to lend money to. So having these things sort of in order before you talk to a financial institution about lending will put you, further down the road in being able to go ahead and get some additional capital. All right,
Great.
Mike, let's talk about additional services.
Yeah, additional services and some closing thoughts. As a reminder, please feel free to use the Q&A box to answer or to ask any questions you'd like Stacy and I to answer at the conclusion of today's call. But we've talked a lot about banking as the sort of the core service here. We've talked about lending, we've talked about payments. What about things like insurance, payroll, even accounting and advisory, right? The world of financial services is wider than just where you store your money and how you transact it. One of the things that we would like to advise is make sure that the service providers you're working with are indeed cannabis friendly. A few years ago, maybe that wasn't an option, but now in just about every vertical, you can find really high quality vendors for all of your financial service needs that are intentionally servicing the cannabis industry. That means they've ensured that their supply chain, be it their banking partner or money movement partner, is understanding and comfortable with the cannabis industry usage. The vendor themselves has the necessary policies and procedures in place to be able to mitigate any risk, and ideally they've also understood the idiosyncrasies of our industry. As we all know, there's certainly some unique qualities that folks may need to work around. Payroll is a perfect example. We saw a very large national player just earlier this year that a number of cannabis businesses were working with that decided they didn't want to be in cannabis anymore. Cannabis was, sort of a twinkle in their eye. They didn't make an intentional part of their business plan. And as a result, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses that were left to scramble to find a new payroll provider or risk their employees not getting paid. You want to avoid that at all costs, right? A service disruption means you have to go out and find a new service provider at a time where you may not be in the market, you may not have the bandwidth, you may not have, all the right provisions in place to be able to onboard that new vendor. So asking up front, seeking, cannabis-friendly providers will certainly help in the long run. And if you're struggling with where to start, again, that's an area that GreenCheck can help with. Our network of vetted service providers are exclusively serving the cannabis industry. And so we have a rigorous due diligence process where we actually do reviews on the vendors themselves to make sure their programs are compliant, not at risk of being shut down. They have, strong conviction in the space and that they'll be around for the long haul. Another thing to keep in mind, a few years ago, getting a place to store your funds was really the most important part of cannabis banking, right? Just having the ability to deposit funds. Well, if you went the route of a fintech or a non-bank organization that is able to accept deposits, and you weren't able to get a routing number or an account number, then the friction that comes with that. It means you can't write your own checks, you can't process ACH, you can't do online bill pay in many cases. That's a reality. There's nothing untoward about that. Venmo, for a lot of folks on the call, are probably familiar. You store funds in a Venmo account. That's technically a bank account, but you don't have your own routing and account number for that account. So being sure to work with either a traditional bank or credit union or a fintech provider that has a traditional routing and account number will ensure that you won't face friction in managing your day-to-day financial activities. And then again, lastly, just as a plug, working with GreenCheck can reduce your compliance overhead, be it in finding and obtaining those initial services, getting onboarded to those service providers in an efficient, effective manner, and then maintaining compliance on an ongoing basis through automated reporting. That gives you peace of mind and also reduces the amount of additional effort you have to put forth in order to maintain those relationships. I see a couple of questions here. Let's see. The first question is about how cannabis clients have to continuously update their license and sales statutes. Does this happen in other industries? Stacy, as the resident banker, I think you've got some perspective you can share here.
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes and no. The high-risk industries that financial institutions work with, cannabis being one of them, certainly require additional information around the ability to legally conduct business. What makes cannabis a little bit unique here is that the disconnect between federal and state law is the primary issue. The federal law says this is a controlled substance, and any activity related to its sale is considered money laundering and criminal activity. At the state level, cannabis is legal in your state that you're operating in, and that puts the bank in this conundrum where is it legal or is it not legal? So years ago, FinCEN, which is the governing body over financial crime, put together guidance and said, okay, financial institutions, we're going to let you bank this industry. We know that you're in this position where you should be banking the industry. However, you need to promise to us that you're going to be transparent and you're going to make sure that the money entering the financial system is only the result of state legal sales. So they have to go through some additional steps in order to prove to their examiners and to FinCEN that the money coming in is tied to legal sales. That is why they ask for the license information to make first and foremost that you are a licensed entity and a legal entity in that state. And then the sales information helps them to demonstrate that the sales activity is in alignment with the deposit activity and normal and expected activity for your type of business. So if they did not have that data, they'd only be guessing. They would be kind of flying in the dark here. So that is why they ask for that additional information.
Thank you, Stace. Couple questions about referrals for CPA firms, specifically that can help set up an accrual system, perhaps offering fractional CFO services, and a specific call out to the ability to help on valuation for work in progress and finished goods.
Okay, so where you need to go here, there are two organizations that I would recommend. One is called NACATS, NACATS, which is the National Association of Cannabis Accounting and Tax Services. I think that's what that stands for. We've worked with a number of folks in that organization, in particular Naomi Granger, who is the CEO of that firm, and she has a number of cannabis-friendly accountants within her purview and organization. They do fractional CFO. I would imagine that there's somebody there that can help you with your valuation of work in process and finished goods. So check out NACATS. And then the other one is Dope CFO. They're another organization of accounting professionals who are cannabis friendly. So either one of those entities can get you a good CPA.
Definitely very important in this industry.
Yes.
Next question. Do you find smaller regional banks are more apt to service the cannabis world as opposed to larger national banks?
Absolutely. We see most of our institutions are community-based and credit unions. We do have some large regional institutions as well that are doing national programs. But your big guys like Huntington, PNC, Chase, Bank of America, they generally are not touching this space. So if you're in that situation, I would strongly suggest you find a more local institution that would help you. And because most of them are really good size, they have all the services that you need. They have ACH, they have wires, they have ATMs, they have branches. They can certainly help you with cash management services and all of that. So don't shy away from the smaller institutions. They've definitely jumped in the game.
How about I'm sort of extrapolating from this person's question, but the banks or credit unions that are lending, are you seeing any trends in the profile of which institutions are deciding to lend above and beyond the services you mentioned?
Yes, they tend to be the larger of the group of community and regional banks. So if you're working with, let's say, Valley Bank or I'm trying to think of some of the other larger clients that we have that are lending, Generations Bank, they are what we call a regional bank. So they cover a pretty decent area, in some cases, national markets. The smaller institutions that are, maybe just your state or, just your region within the state, are less likely to lend. But like I said before, always start with your primary institution and have the conversation. Because I can think of a couple of our state level institutions that are lending to their customers. So I would start there and then look to your larger cannabis friendly banks.
Are there merchant accounts available for cannabis operators?
Merchant accounts. So Stripe is not an option. They are not cannabis friendly. Going back to the slide we had on payments, those are some of the options there that could help you with merchant processing and being able to collect payments. I would suggest that you poke around our marketplace because we have a few of those vendors in there that are cannabis friendly and have been vetted by us before just sort of calling around to any sort of merchant providers.
Yeah, and because the questioner mentioned Stripe, I will point out that if you're looking for a card not present payment, like for ecom, a typical ACH solution would work virtually the same way. However, instead of entering their bank or their credit card number, the customer would enter their bank account info upon checkout. And folks like AeroPay and others do have e-commerce integrations. All right, I think last question that I see, what is the impact of Schedule 3 on cannabis business financial functions?
That that's going to be a tough one to answer, but I'll share my thoughts on it. And Mike, I appreciate yours as well. It's going to depend on how it gets rescheduled. So right now, Schedule 3 indicates that there is an accepted medical use. It's very possible that only part of the industry will be allowed to move to Schedule 3. So We may see the medical market be able to move to Schedule 3. We may see certain products move to Schedule 3. For example, maybe tinctures and edibles will be okay, but flower would not be because of the smoking component. There's a lot of rulemaking that needs to be made after the decision to reschedule to really clarify what that means. With that said, it's still a controlled substance. It's still going to present a disconnect between the federal level and the state level. So it's possible and likely that the state markets will stay in place and in conflict with the federal law in order to allow you to continue with adult use programs. In which case, the challenges around compliance, money laundering, and all of those things will still remain for financial institutions. So I don't know as if it will have as big of an impact as everyone is hoping for, although it is a step in the right direction to show the value of this plant. But we'll need to see what sort of downstream regulations come out for financial institutions after the rescheduling in order to really answer that question completely.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the timeline on when those regulations will come is still, largely to be determined. I mean, the Genius Act, right, passed and offered, federal, I guess, legality, or at least, I don't know, specificity around stablecoins and other cryptocurrency products. But you still have the vast, vast majority of financial institutions that are unwilling to work with cryptocurrency companies because there's still ambiguity in the market. So rescheduling, descheduling, what really matters here are the financial regulators' examination guidelines. So that's the key point to keep a lookout for, in the news and in the metaverse as such. The ability for a bank to service cannabis kind of isn't really even about the legality anymore. When you boil it all down, it's basically just because of the ambiguity. The banks that don't want to serve cannabis, they don't want to serve cannabis because there isn't a prescriptive and crystal clear set of guidelines for them to follow from their financial regulators. And unfortunately, they're not regulated by the same people who are classifying cannabis as Schedule 1 versus Schedule 3. So for financial services to really, experience that unlock, we need the financial service regulators to follow the FDA's lead and figure out what those examination guidelines are going to be.
And that process, as you said, Mike, can take a substantial amount of time. And I would guess 18 to 24 months before the regulatory guidelines are drafted. And then typically there's a grace period with any new regulation that if the regulation is drafted in, let's say, January of 2027, they would give the financial institutions until September before they had to comply. So it can be a really lengthy process. And between point A and point B, there's a lot of ambiguity and change. I do see one more question, and I love it. So I'd love to answer this one. Can any of these cannabis-friendly institutions give away a coffee mug when you open a new account, only it has a cannabis leaf on it? And the answer is absolutely. We have a number of our financial institutions that are extremely cannabis friendly. They have created branding around their cannabis program. The one that comes to mind, they actually created a whole division called Canna First Financial, and they absolutely have giveaway products that they give away at conferences and that sort of thing that have cannabis images and words. We've seen there's a program in Michigan called Thrive, right? And they have a little leaf as part of their, it's not a cannabis leaf, but it is a leaf. So there are institutions that are getting really brave about putting themselves out there as a cannabis friendly institution. So yes, if you're in this world from a promotional product perspective, Scott, go talk to them. All right, last call for questions. All right, Noelle.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today. We appreciate you taking out of your time out of your day. I'm nearing the end of my day, as you can tell, because I can no longer speak. Um, Mike and Stacy, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on this very complicated topic that's kind of ever evolving and yet not also evolving very quickly. um, and especially, I want to thank Green Check again for making this webinar possible. We really appreciate the opportunity to bring this kind of information to our audience. So again, thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
folks.